The prophecy didn't promise a savior, it promised a choice, and on that night in Godric's Hollow, the choice was made by the wrong person. We were led to believe that Lily Potter's sacrifice was a passive shield, but what if her love was so desperate it accidentally tore a hole in the logic of magic itself? When Voldemort cast the killing curse, it didn't rebound off the child. It was anchored to the child by Lily's ritualistic grief, turning the nursery into a localized collapse of time and space. The green light struck the boy, but instead of the soul departing, the room froze in a stasis of absolute zero. James and Lily didn't fall. They stood paralyzed as they watched their son's eyes turn from the vibrant green of life to the dull, reflective sheen of an extinguished star. Voldemort didn't vanish. He was compressed into a singularity of shadow, trapped within the very crib he sought to destroy. The Order of the Phoenix arrived to find a house that refused to burn, containing a child who breathed but did not pulse. The boy who lived died that night, but his body refused to realize it. This was the first lie of the Second Wizarding War. The Dark Lord was gone, but the Potters had inherited something much worse than a corpse. For 10 years, Godric's Hollow remained under a Fidelius charm so thick it felt like a bruise on the landscape. While the wizarding world toasted to a peace they hadn't earned, James and Lily lived in a domestic purgatory, feeding a child who never grew, never spoke, and never slept. They became the world's foremost experts in the one branch of magic Dumbledore feared most, the preservation of the shell. James, the man who once fought for the light, began to experiment with the hollow breath, a technique used by ancient necromancers to keep the flesh from rotting when the spirit is absent. Lily's research took her deeper into the Department of Mysteries, not as an unspeakable, but as a thief of concepts, stealing the essence of time to keep Harry's body in a perpetual state of October 31st. They weren't grieving parents anymore. They were alchemists of the macabre, trying to stitch a soul back together, using the only material they had left, their own sanity. But the more they gave of themselves, the more they realized that the Harry in the crib was starting to draw magic from the house itself. The walls began to bleed ink, and the air hummed with a frequency that sounded like 1,000 voices screaming in a language that predated wands. Hogwarts letters are not sent by people. They are generated by the castle's own ancient consciousness, and that consciousness cannot be fooled by a Fidelius charm. On Harry's 11th birthday, 1,000 owls descended upon a house that was supposed to be invisible, their feathers turning to ash as they touched the corrupted wards. Dumbledore, realizing the Potter's deception had reached a breaking point, finally forced his way into the sanctum. He didn't find a happy family. He found 2 shadows of people tending to a boy whose skin was cold as marble and whose presence felt like a puncture wound in the world. Dumbledore saw the truth. Voldemort wasn't dead, and Harry wasn't alive. They were entangled in a quantum lock, a binary existence where one could not fully manifest without the other's complete destruction. The headmaster made a decision that would haunt him more than Grindelwald. He insisted the boy come to Hogwarts, not to be educated, but to be contained within the most powerful wards in Britain. The Harry who entered the Great Hall wasn't a student. He was a containment vessel for a nuclear magical event.
The Sorting Hat is an artifact designed to read the essence of a soul. But when it was placed on the head of the boy who died, it didn't speak, it wept. A black, oily substance leaked from the hat's seams as it felt the absolute vacuum where a personality should be. For the first time in a millennium, the hat refused to sort, instead whispering a single word that echoed through the minds of every person in the hall: void. The students saw a boy with messy hair and glasses, but the ghosts of Hogwarts saw a predator. The bloody Baron fled the hall. Nearly headless Nick collapsed into a pile of ectoplasm. They recognized what the living could not. Harry Potter was a mobile entrance to the Veil. He sat at the Gryffindor table by default, but no one sat near him. The air around him was perpetually 5 degrees colder. He didn't eat, he didn't blink. He simply stared at the head table with eyes that seemed to be recording everything for a master who was still waiting in the dark. Quirinus Quirrell felt the pull before anyone else. The entity on the back of his head, the remnant of Riddle, didn't feel fear toward this Harry. It felt hunger. Voldemort realized that his own Horcruxes were crude compared to what the Potters had accidentally created. Harry was a perfect vessel, a body without a soul that could hold the entirety of a Dark Lord without the need for a fragile shared existence. But there was a catch that even Voldemort hadn't anticipated. The void within Harry wasn't just empty, it was predatory. When Quirrell tried to touch the boy in the Forbidden Forest, it wasn't Harry who was burned. It was Voldemort's spirit that felt itself being sucked into the boy like water down a drain. Harry wasn't the victim of a parasite, he was a trap. Lily's love had created a digestive system for souls. Every time a dark entity came near the boy, a piece of it was stripped away to fuel the boy's artificial heartbeat. Harry was eating the Dark Lord bit by bit, and in doing so, he was starting to wake up. By the second year, the boy began to speak, but the voice wasn't his. It was a composite of every person who had ever cast a spell near him. He spoke in the cadences of Dumbledore, the sharp tones of Snape, and the rhythmic whispers of the Forbidden Forest. He was a mimic, a biological mirror reflecting the world back at itself. Hermione Granger, driven by a mix of pity and intellectual terror, was the only one who stayed. She realized that Harry wasn't evil, but he was hungry. He needed information to build a personality. She began to read to him, not from textbooks, but from novels, poetry, and histories. She was trying to give a soul to a machine. But the Harry that emerged was a calculated entity. He realized that his parents had committed a great crime to keep him here, and he realized that Dumbledore was waiting for the right moment to delete him. The boy who was meant to be a hero began to develop the cold, logical survival instinct of a creature that knows it is an anomaly. He wasn't looking for a way to save the world. He was looking for a way to remain real. The ritual in the graveyard of Little Hangleton changed. Peter Pettigrew didn't need Harry's blood to resurrect Voldemort. He needed Harry's absence. The plan was to extract the trapped fragment of Riddle from the boy and place it in a new body. But when the ritual knife cut Harry's skin, what flowed out wasn't blood. It was liquid moonlight, the silver substance of memories. The ritual backfired. Instead of Voldemort rising, the graveyard was pulled into Harry. The tombstones, the trees, even the spirit of Tom Riddle Sr. were consumed by the boy's skin. The Harry vessel expanded, his physical form flickering between that of an infant, a teenager, and an ancient old man. James and Lily, who had followed in secret, watched as their son became a living breach in reality. They realized that by refusing to let him die, they had created a god of nothingness. The boy looked at his father and spoke in a voice that was perfectly, terrifyingly clear. "You gave me life, but you forgot to give me a limit. Now I will take yours." The final act didn't take place at Hogwarts, but at the Ministry of Magic in the Room of Death. Harry stood before the veil, the very source of the material used to fix him. He was no longer a boy. He was a towering figure of translucent light and shadow, a bridge between the living and the dead. The wizarding world mobilized against him. Dumbledore, the Order, and the remnants of the Death Eaters joined forces to stop the Hollow King. They cast every curse in the book, but Harry simply opened his mouth and inhaled the magic. He was the end of all wands. He was the silence at the end of every incantation. Dumbledore realized the only way to close the breach was to provide the void with what it actually wanted, the original souls that were supposed to have left that night in 1981. The prophecy was a debt, and the interest had been accruing for 14 years. To save the world, James and Lily had to finally complete the event that was interrupted in the nursery. James and Lily walked toward their son, not with wands, but with open arms. They understood the price. The love that had once been a curse had to become a finality. As they touched the boy's skin, the void recognized the missing pieces. The explosion was silent. It was a wave of being that washed over the world, restoring the natural order. The Horcruxes across Britain shattered simultaneously as the hunger of the Harry vessel consumed every fragment of Riddle on its way out of this reality. When the light faded, the Ministry was empty. There was no Harry, no James, and no Lily. In the center of the room where the veil once stood, there was only a small, ordinary wooden crib, perfectly preserved. Inside it lay a single green lily and a pair of broken glasses. The wizarding world was safe, but it was a world that had lost its capacity for miracles because it had seen what happens when a miracle refuses to die. The story of the boy who lived was over. The story of the world that stayed began, and it was a world that finally, mercifully, learned how to mourn.